Okay, well, I apologize for that. I'm having some technical difficulties here with my screen capture software, I guess. So I won't be able to show you my slides. I'll put them up on my website or something, but and I'll paste some links in the chat for you. But anyway, I guess I'm on the air now. Um, anyway, I'd like to thank Mark for asking me to speak about this. And my name's Jeff Zacher, and I have a startup company called Zacher Network Solution. I guess Mark had seen some research I'd done on trying to overcome an internet kill switch in my wiki, and I'd met Mark over at Mises.org and found out about AnCap and helped him get some technology up and running so that we can collaborate for AnCap, and I'm pretty excited about it. But I guess a little bit about my background. I, I pretty much always had libertarian ideas, for my entire life. I started programming at a young age, and I think technology and libertarian ideas go hand in hand because, the idea of independence and decentralization and those kind of things tend to work a lot better in computing, and, why not for the individual? I mean, I grew up reading Robert Heinlein. I know Heinlein wasn't really a libertarian himself, but he had a lot of libertarian ideas in his books, and my dad, read a lot of Milton Friedman and Hayek, so I was exposed to that, and really enjoyed those kind of things, and I think the real breakthrough for me was when I read Human Action by Mises. That really put a lot of ideas together, as far as how things work. And I guess economists don't like the ideas that Mises put forth because, there's no empirical, way to prove them, but, Euclidean geometry is the same way, I mean, you don't just throw out Euclidean geometry because there's no, way to quantify those things, Euclidean geometry is axiomatic in the same way. So, anyway, that's my introduction. For this whole deal. I've titled this Creating Alternative Networks, and what I'm going to talk about is basically creating mesh networks in your own community with some software called FreeFunk, which is a German project where they mesh several communities in Europe together with wireless cards, and they're independent of their ISPs now. They have community networks. They can still connect to the internet, but if their ISPs go down, they still have community networking, and this is real similar to what we saw done in Egypt. Governments have before, and the ones that haven't really want to. They want to be able to shut down the internet, for whatever reason. There's a bill right now. And I know it's kind of iffy and controversial whether that bill will actually shut down the internet, but I've read through a lot of the text of it, and it gives a lot of outs in there, where the one person could arbitrarily decide, that our networks are threatened or there's too much social unrest, and just pull the plug on your ISP. And right now that's our only connection to the internet is through our ISP. If our cable goes down or our DSL connection goes down or satellite or however we're connected to the internet, if that goes down, we're basically not connected to anything with our computers. So, with that situation in mind, that's where a wireless mesh network fits in, where we can convert our wireless devices into nodes that will connect to other devices in our community, and we'll basically have the same power that the greater internet has, and bring it down to a local community level. And then also give some ideas, where we can be useful as entrepreneurs and possibly make some money off of it. Egypt had basically, it looked like from the graph that they basically just called the ISPs and shut off the internet. I have that graph. I can't show it to you right now, but when you go back and look at the slides, it's in there. It's one of the slides, and you can see a cascade minute by minute where one ISP shut off the internet, then the next one, then the next one, and so forth. So it looked like it was just shut down with a series of calls. Um, but what happened, the protesters had anticipated this apparently, and they had mesh networks set up. They were able to, switch their networking, wireless networking routers and phones and devices over to a mesh mode where they could all still connect with each other. And a French ISP opened up some dial-in modem pools, and they were able to pipe the internet in that way. And so, a lot of protesters still had access to Twitter and Facebook and this kind of stuff. The problem that we're into with our network as it is now, our connection between our computers is basically in a star topology. So what that means, this is a hierarchical topology. It's kind of like a pyramid, where it's like the old mainframe days, where you have a mainframe computer and several terminals dialed into this mainframe. So if you take this mainframe out, then all these computers out here can't talk to each other anymore. And what we want to do is move these computers to a mesh topology, so even if this computer goes down, all these other devices can all still talk to each other. And in the past, it was very expensive to create mesh networks because you had to have physical wires between so many machines to create networks like this. I mean, if we're doing this all with wires, we can't afford to run wires. It's just not practical to be able to run wires between every house in your neighborhood. But, with unlicensed band wireless networking, we can create those links between our homes. And, that's really where the real power is. What mesh networking will let us do is turn our communities into, self-sustaining clouds, with links, from our community to the bigger internet to other communities and so forth. Inside of these clouds, we can create our own social networks. The Free Funk project has a phone service, a voice over IP phone service that runs inside of their mesh. It basically lets us, get rid of this pyramid hierarchical structure and turn it more into a sphere. Which, I read an article on Lou Rockwell, I guess last week, and somebody was pointing that out. The world really wants to work as a sphere, and I think the elite, at the top really want it to work like a pyramid, so they're always, kind of shoring up these corners. It seems like, liberty can really be increased, the more that we can use technology to connect ourselves, without the need of that hierarchical structure. Some of the advantages of mesh networks are they're self-configuring. So instead of having the internet, there's DNS servers and routing servers and so forth on the internet that direct traffic and figure out the best route between your computer and the web server you're looking at, or whatever content you're viewing on the internet. With a mesh network, each node is responsible for its part of the configuration. So what happens is a client will send out a flood of packets, and every node on the network can figure out and gauge as the traffic continues what the best way to route that is. It's also self-reconfiguring, which means you can add new devices into the mesh, and the mesh will automatically adjust. It's self-tuning. We'll figure out the best routes, and if those routes change and the efficiency changes, all the nodes on the network are able to adapt to that. It's self-monitoring. There's no need to have an overall. It's really very difficult to have an overall view of a mesh network from a central location. Every node on the mesh is able to kind of do its own monitoring and stuff. With the aspects of being self-configurating, self-tuning, and self-monitoring, it can be said to be self-healing also. And, it's also very scalable. These mesh networks are basically the plug-and-play of networking. because you can pretty much just introduce a new device onto the mesh, and it will go ahead and adapt to that, and it's very easy to configure. Um, what what we need to be able to do this is, first thing we need is a wireless router, um, preferably like a Linksys WRT 54, which is you can get them down at Walmart. That's what I have. You can find these anywhere, and the process is that you take your router and replace it with special firmware. FreeFunk already has this firmware out on their site that you can download, and if you've ever configured a router, there's a web page, a web kind of interface to configure the router, and you go in on the configuration screen and upload the firmware file, and that goes ahead and reflashes the firmware with the mesh networking firmware. And then there's a custom configuration screen for your new firmware setup where you can go ahead and do your configuration. You'll also need an antenna, some kind of rooftop antenna, and that varies widely, depending on what kind of links you're making, how far, you and your neighbor's house is, what kind of setting you're in, if you're in a dense urban area, or if you're in out in the countryside with lots of open areas. There's different configurations for the antenna. Something else I also recommend is having a PICO peering agreement, which is, it's a pretty basic agreement saying that you won't interfere with any traffic that comes through your network, and it also, lets you set your own terms of service for your own mesh segment. So, it's a pretty flexible agreement, but, that's the main thing, is to guarantee the, the privacy and the integrity of data coming through your network. And then you need to pick a protocol like OSLA or Batman or any of the mesh networking protocols. I think in Germany they're using OSLA as their primary protocol, but you could use Batman or other protocols. And then once you have enough nodes on your network, you can start setting up your services, like your file sharing, your voice over IP, and so forth. And then there's ways to anonymize your network. You can use proxy servers, are probably the simplest solution, but proxy server doesn't really give you as much privacy as tunneling does. Then there's also the Tor project. I saw somebody out there saying that Tor was owned, and so there's I2P, which is the Invisible Internet Plan, and that's probably the preferred way. But basically, Tor and I2P, the way that they work, they reroute your traffic periodically. What happens is, okay, let's say we have a client over here and a client over here. This is kind of hard to do without pictures too. And they want to speak to each other. What we do is we have a set endpoint and a set outpoint for that traffic. And then in the midst of it, that traffic is rerouted periodically, and those twists and turns are all erased as time goes on, so there's no log and no way to trace the traffic, where it originated and where it's going and so forth. It's kind of tantamount to, if you were walking down the street and figured out somebody was following you, it would be like being able to, start taking all kinds of twists and turns on your path and immediately erase your footprints behind you, to make you virtually untrackable. And then there's also Freenet, which, it works similar. All of these work, fairly similar. They're basically virtual private network tunnels throughout the whole network. Something else that I found out, I primarily use open source software, and I was having some trouble with my screen capture stuff, so I went ahead and went over to Windows. That's probably why I don't have any screen capturing that works. It's kind of odd. Justin TV blocked Linux out specifically by OS. They did some packet sniffing to block me out of there. So I had to come over here and use Windows to give this presentation. But when I booted up into